Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good night. This is Rihanna, and welcome to Black Mental Health Matters Show, where we engage in conversation to deepen our learning about mental health challenges that are impacting the global Black community. I am your host, Rihanna Ebanks Bab, and today we will be delving into discussion around the root causes of domestic abuse within Black communities and exploring the solutions through awareness and action. Bear with me as I play you our introductory video, and I will introduce our guests shortly. Thank you very much. Hello. Thank you very much. Apologies for that. My name is Rihanna. For those of you that didn't catch that introduction, I am Rihanna Ebanks Bab from Black Mental Health Matters. And this week's show, we will be discussing the root causes of domestic abuse and looking at some of the solutions and awareness and actions that we can be doing to understand how best we can support the global Black community. I'll be joined by three special guests that will provide both professional and personal insight. And one of our first guests, who I'll introduce now, is Carleen Andel. She is a domestic abuse charity director. So, without further ado, Carleen, please come forth and introduce yourself to our guests.
Hello, everybody. As Rihanna said, I am one of the directors for a domestic abuse charity. The charity does provide sessions for people who are in domestic abusive relationships or have recently left domestic abusive relationships to find out about different factors and characteristics from abusers. We also support children and also people in the LGBTQ community, as well as offering service to men that have also been in domestic abusive relationships as well.
Amazing. Thank you, and pleasure to have you here. Next up, we have Louisette, and Louisette is a certified fitness instructor and a psychology and public policy student. And I will bring forth Louisette to the stage. Welcome, Louisette, and please introduce yourself to our guests and our
Hello.
viewers.
Hello. Again, my name is Louisette St. Ford. I'm a certified fitness instructor for about 10 years now. I'm currently majoring in public policy and psychology. I'm also a musician, and I've been a caregiver to a parent with schizophrenia for over 10 years now. So I do have experience within mental health, and this is a part of the reason why I decided to major in that and be able to get into spaces where policy could delve more deeper into that and make some influence and change, because it is a serious topic.
Mhm. Thank you. And for those of you wondering why we can't see Louisette's physical face, that she's just having some technical issues, but she's here, she's present, and she'll be definitely joining us in this very important discussion. So our last and final guest is Daniel, who is the founder and managing director of Voice of Restoration International. He's also an author and a teacher by training, and he's also going to bring forward some lived experience of mental health. So again, without further ado, welcome Daniel to Black Mental Health Matters. Please introduce yourself to our guests and our viewers.
Hello, viewers. I want to say good evening for those who are in African setting here, because I'm in Kampala and it's 5 p.m. Local time here, and I'm sure it's morning in other parts of the world. I want to say this day, Saturday, the 5th of November, I am grateful to be part of the show tonight. And yes, as my host has introduced, Daniel Delabatibi is my name. And yeah, I've lived experience on this subject, and I am passionate about this particular subject of domestic abuse and violence. It's good to have every one of you on show. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And like I said, to give both professional and personal experience, as well as a range of different types of abuse we're going to be discussing on the show today, as well as different perspectives, hence why we've got such a great array of panelists for this show. So let's delve into the first question. And I think it's very important for our viewers to understand the topic at hand through a definition. So in your own words, I'm going to throw this out to Louisette first. Please define domestic abuse, and why do you think domestic abuse services are moving away from the term domestic violence and using the term domestic abuse?
Well, what I did was I had to just go through different definitions to get a better grasp of it. For me, what I've realized that with abuse, it can come with certain behaviors, certain actions. It can be psychological. And I realized for me that it's kind of on a spectrum. So it kind of sometimes the abuse can lead to the physical violence. So I feel like, to me, I feel like both are very much the same, but it's just the movement from one side of the spectrum to the other, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that. And Carlene, what would you say? Because I know there's a lot of importance around terminology, phraseology, and vocabulary in this specific area of discussion. So what would you say is domestic abuse, and why are domestic abuse services moving away from the term domestic violence?
Yeah. So the reason everybody is obviously familiar with the term with domestic violence, and we know that violence can be a physical action. What has been happening is that there has been a lot of abusive situations that people hasn't classified as abuse because it wasn't physical. So it's kind of similar what we saw with, some rape victims, what there wasn't any evidence that you said no. So obviously it's not rape. So this is what we find that was happening in domestic abusive situations. Because that it wasn't physical, it wasn't being classified as a certain type of abuse. So the reason why the terminology has changed from domestic violence to domestic abuse is that we have begun to realize that a lot more things need to be incorporated, and a lot of domestic abusive situations actually doesn't even relate to anything physical. So what Louisette was saying, in one way is, what, right, it does, domestic abuse does encompass different things: sociological, physical, sexual, financial, emotional. We also have the controlling behavior as well as the coercive behavior as well. So when we look at all those aspects, we now realize that it's actually abusive behavior and not just physical. And we have many different legislations and different types of laws that have come out now to actually encompass that as well, such as people being followed home, people having things, tracking devices, on those phones. Those aren't physical things, but they are a way of to have the controlling behavior and the coercive behavior, which now falls under the Domestic Abuse Act.
Yeah. And that's obviously specific to the UK. I know that you're referring to. So thank you
Yes.
for that as
Yes.
well. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that question? What would you say constitute as domestic abuse, or a definition of domestic abuse for you, especially living in Kampala?
Yeah, being an African, we have taken a long time not understanding domestic abuse. We quickly run to understand domestic violence because for it necessitates physical, harm and all that. But when it comes to domestic abuse, we are trying to help people understand because domestic abuse has to do with a behavior that inflicts or causes distress, and distress affects this person, like my colleagues were saying here, not only in one form. This distress comes in various forms, and it affects how somebody operates. It affects how somebody views life. And this abuse, if it's not taken very well care of, and then it results into negative experiences. That explains why there is a rise on mental health challenges because of the distress that is coming to the brain, the damage that is coming because of the domestic abuse.
Thank you for that. And I think especially where you mentioned about the different types, you've all mentioned different types, but what are some of the common types that we see within Black communities, the common types of domestic abuse that we see? I'll throw this out to Louisette first.
Well, I think one of the things that we tend to associate domestic abuse or domestic violence to is that we only put it or connect it to relationships, intimate partner relationships. But for me, we see that as connected to the relationships between parents and their children. There could be elders in the home. There could be how children treat their parents or their elders, right? So it's being displayed in so many different ways. And when we say domestic, underneath the same roof, So I think for me, it's not only connected to the intimate partner connection, where it might be a husband or wife, or boyfriend girlfriend, or partners who've been living together for many years. It's connected in different ways in terms of the various relationships between the individuals who are living in the same household.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleen, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, kind of threw me off guard.
Sorry.
It's okay. I mean, yeah, with domestic abuse, as was said, it does come under, relationships and family as well. As far as in the Black community, if I'm honest, there's not really one that I've seen to be more prevalent. I know that we have things that look to be much more accepted, such as physical. You will see, oh, that person just beats up so and so, but not really saying that that's an abusive situation, or she has to stay in that relationship because the man controls the money, and that can be a cultural thing as well, where the mother or the grandmother, whoever stayed at home and take care of the children. But because we have so many new things such as technology, now as well, which you didn't have before, we see a lot of this technical abuse as well, and stalking that's happening as well, and also way to now track people using phones as well. So there hasn't really been something significant that stands out, which gives more abuse specifically to the Black community, but the level of abuse has increased just due to different things that we now have access to from my experiences anyway.
Thank you. And Daniel, anything more to add to that question?
Yeah, in terms of abuse, domestic abuse, I like what my sisters have all already said here. Let's look at it from domestic, the word domestic. That means under one roof or under one community, you see that it can be to do with the parents and their children. It can be wife and husband. It can be brother and sister, But then the whole issue here is we're looking at it. I look at it in 6 different aspects. One, the physical abuse, which comes with the intention to cause trauma via bodily contact. Somebody has a bodily contact with you, but the idea is to cause trauma to you. And this can come either through kicking or can come through, all kind of physical touch that comes in an abusive way. The second approach to that, the second area I look at is the verbal abuse. Where somebody speaks things and these things go down to hurting your emotions, the verbal abuse. And the other one is the sexual abuse. We've seen so many.
Can I just interject there? Because I think verbal abuse is quite a poignant one, because I think that is one that many people experience and don't acknowledge or recognize that it's abusive, especially if they're retaliating, so to speak, but they're engaging in abusive dialogue. And I don't think that's many people actually recognize or acknowledge that as abuse. But continue anyway.
Actually, what happens with this abuse is when it comes to the verbal abuse here, it comes with the intention of belittling you, in a way of humiliating you, in the way of threatening you, in the way of calling names, all to let you feel bad, it's. And then the sexual abuse, this comes from within. We look at rape, we look at attempted rape, all these incest, sexual harassment, and all this can be there. And then the psychological abuse. And also you look at the aspect of the financial abuse. Actually, the financial abuse is one thing which is causing a lot of distress in families. That's why so many marriages are collapsing. So many relationships are breaking. Why? Because one person is controlling using money. The financial abuse is also one particular area that people struggle with. The cultural abuse. My sister Colin talked about it already. The cultural abuse. And then you look at it from the various perspectives, and indeed it is wide. But at the end of the day, the whole issue is its impact, the causing of the distress, the cause of the internal wounds that nobody can see. People are wounded, people are hurt, but then these pains may not be seen. These broken hearts may not be seen, but actually what people are hurting. So it's really helpful that people get to understand this so that they can be able to live fruitful lives.
It's true. I know a lot of people would say that with physical abuse, the scars and bruises fade, but with like psychological, emotional, those are the ones that remain and are somewhat harder to recover from. So I can understand that. Thank you for that really nice rounded explanation of the different types of abuse. But I think it's also important for us to discuss who can actually be a victim of domestic abuse. And before you answer, or before I pick someone to answer, reasoning for this is because I went to an event last week, actually, and this question was posed to the audience. And we were all asked, the question was, who can be a victim of domestic abuse? And everyone was given a mask to paint a face of what a person that can be a recipient or a victim of domestic abuse can look like. So before I give the actual answer that the host gave, I'll throw out to you, Daniel, first. Who can be a victim of domestic abuse, in your opinion?
Like I said it earlier on, domestic abuse can be experienced by parents, by children, by siblings, and anybody within the family setting can actually experience this abuse.
Thank you. Colleen?
I would have phrased the question, who cannot be affected by domestic, abuse? I mean, it's kind of like what, Daniel said, domestic means anybody within the family, anybody relating to the home or the household. So that means everybody, which is why we know when I do my session, with healthy relationships, for example, I make sure that, people, when I speak about relationships, I mean family as well, because that does encompass a type of relationship. So it's exactly what Daniel said, anybody that fits under that whole family or household bracket.
Yeah, thank you. And Louisa, anything more to add to that one?
Well, yeah, no, I agree with both Carlene and Daniel, that absolutely anybody could be be a victim of abuse. And I wanted to actually add that one thing that I have observed is that in the Black community, unfortunately, when we do speak of the victimization of abuse, I find that, and I mean this with all due respect, with all those who are watching, who are listening, I feel that sometimes whenever we speak about victimization and when we highlight, let's just say, for example, the topic of abuse against women in Black women in the community, I have said this to many people. I always find there's a pushback. There's a pushback, like, oh, well, men could be abused too. Black men are abused too. And it's like, I think there has to be a clarification that when we're speaking about the Black woman's experience with abuse, we're not discounting everybody else's experience with abuse.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of during the pandemic, when the protests were happening and people were saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. There was this pushback of, well, all lives matter, blue lives matter, the gray lives matter, dogs lives matter. Like, it was very
Yeah.
Dark lives. I gotta use that one.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be, the reason why I brought that up is because unfortunately within the Black community, I know, like, I'm in the Americas, like I'm in Canada. I see that the numbers in Canada is similar to what's in the States and in the Caribbean. I'm not too sure how it is in the continent of Africa and Europe, but I know in the American continent, single parent homes are usually driven by the mothers. So when the topic of Black femicide arises, or abuse against Black women, the pushback is disturbing, because again, we're not saying that the children aren't being abused. We're not saying elders aren't being abused. We're not saying the men aren't being abused. We're speaking about the mothers, because that tends to be at such a rate that if these women are being abused and they're the ones leading the homes, if they're broken, that's going to trickle down to the children. That leaves a door open for this woman to continue to entertain partners that will continue to abuse her in some way. So I just wanted to add that there, because again, obviously everybody can be a victim, but I just wanted to let viewers know that when we speak about abuse, or if we're highlighting a certain person, or especially Black women, we're not discounting the experience of Black men.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to the next one. And I think where we speak about, obviously the topic is about root causes, and this might be a bit of a generalization when we say Black communities, but I'll kind of throw it as a two-pronged question. What is the problem and issue when we generalize, when we say Black communities, first of all, and what are some of the root causes? So I'm going to start with you, Daniel, on this question.
Yeah. Looking at the generalization, I think we are coming to that place because of we've seen the rate of abuse experienced by this group of people. Yeah. I think it is on the higher rate compared to other races. We're not trying to be racists, but we're just trying to look at and observe the trend of events, how things are happening in this kind of community, and vis-a-vis this other kind of community. And looking at it like what is happening in Uganda or in Africa actually happens across, only that how it happens kind of differs. But looking at the causes, there are several backgrounds when it comes to the causes of this abuse. And you realize that in most cases, there are so many things that come in. Abuse can be experienced, like I was saying, within the family setting. And the person who has the control wants to manipulate other areas. And it has been said here, you see that sometimes people have been abused, but they get glued there, they get used to the abuse, and they're like, oh, this is now a lifestyle to live because this is how it is, because maybe children grew up seeing this happening, and then the trend just continues. But I think it's time for us to say, no, I think enough is enough. We need to change the whole story, because we've seen our great-grandparents abuse our grandparents, and then also we've seen our parents abuse each other, yeah. And then this whole thing comes, and it comes down up to even us. We are expressing abuse, and some of this is coming from the generational issues, because we saw what was there. And there is something that I wanted to just bring out here, even as I go to the causes. You know, there is some trauma that comes with the abuse, which we refer to as the trauma bond. You know, somebody has been a victim, but then they can't leave. They remain in there. And they have so many questions. Why should I leave? Because, yeah, I might leave, but then still this person, you know, and then they still have to justify why they shouldn't leave, why they should continue with the abuse. They give different reasons. But actually, when they are in pain, when they're actually struggling, and they are there, others will tell you, if it wasn't for this, I would have gone. If it wasn't for this, I would have done this. But bottom line is, abuse is traumatic, and the victims experience these traumatic experiences, and it affects their mental health. And this damages the brain. And if this is not helped, and then the cycle continues. That explains why you see people are living in generational traumas, you know. Not that they are living in that generational trauma because they have experienced the trauma themselves, but they are now living through the history of how things were happening then, and how things happened, and how things are happening now, and the whole thing continues. But my call tonight is that, please, anybody who has experienced or who is experiencing this, please seek for help. Seek for help. Help is available. Now, coming to the causes, I will just highlight a few so that my colleagues can also add on. One is mental health problems, the mental problems, you know. So somebody who has ever had a mental breakdown, there are times the way they speak, they are violent, their words are harsh, you know, they can manipulate here and there because of their mental health conditions. Yeah. So that is an issue. Number two, poverty and unemployment. Where there is a poverty and unemployment, we normally say here that when poverty comes through the door, love will jump through the window. You know, and where there is financial distress, where there is financial stress and all that, and there's joblessness, definitely that environment will definitely be hostile. There will be abuse. Education is also something to do with it, because where abuse has been experienced more, it is because of the level of awareness. You know, education gives you some level of awareness. But then when the education level is not very high, then you may not be able to know. That's why people will be able to live with their abuse, because they don't know that actually it is being abused. You know, so that is also an issue. Young parents, people who are young parents, like even me, when we are still having our toddlers, we actually, the thing that I kept learning along the way, there are frustrations, there is anger, there is aggression that comes, even there is depression that comes along there. Because you're young parents, you are trying to learn, you are trying to adjust to life, you are trying to adjust to babies, you are trying to adjust, so you begin to struggle here and there, So along the way, there will be abuse. The relationship retention behavior.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it goes down to not actually knowing how to have a healthy relationship as you're growing. Having that dynamic change so quickly can be a very big factor. But I know that's not true for all young parents, but definitely for many, knowing how to have healthy boundaries well is a very big issue. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to one of the other guests to chime in on that as well. So Louisette, do you have anything to add? Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Would you mind repeating the question for me? Daniel said a lot of really good stuff, so I want to make sure that I don't take from what he just said. I remember he said that earlier. He said, "Let's not." But how can we make sure that we don't, over say the same thing? So
it was basically around what is the issue of generalizing, and that was more off the back of what you said about you being based in America. Daniel's obviously based in Africa. Me and Carleen were based in the UK, but Black communities, we have Black communities in all of these different areas. So generalizing the phrase Black community can be problematic in itself. So where do you see the issues within that? And then the other half of that question was around the root causes within those communities.
Well, it's interesting because Daniel did point out that abuse is abuse, right? Because it's causing a trauma. Is causing the problem or the result from whatever that abuse might be. It might be cultural. It might be a family in Uganda, or somewhere. I believe I was told that, please, nobody be offended by what I'm saying because I could be wrong. I believe that there are still child brides, I believe, in certain tribes in Nigeria. I could be wrong. Now, my point is this: the experiences might be differing in different areas, but it's resulting in the same pain. It's still turning into a pain that is creating an epigenetic trauma that is being passed down through generations. Now, when I meet a Black person from the UK, when I meet a person from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, when I meet a Black person from Trinidad, when I meet a Black person from New York, when I meet a Black person from Sweden, when I tell you how connected we are, it's just insane how our experiences are there are more similarities than there are differences. There might be differences in language or, the music or little cultural difference, but the underlying similarities are very strong, especially for the fact that I know that, there are some Black people who don't like to be generalized. But when we look at the fact that we all came out of a melting pot due to the transatlantic slave war, the transatlantic slave trade, we were literally transported everywhere. The slave masters were transporting a person from Haiti, taking them over to Louisiana. If they weren't working out in Louisiana, the slave master didn't like them over there, they would send them over to the UK. Sometimes they would ship them right back over to Barbados. It was a whole bunch of mixing. And we have to realize that the DNA inside of us is very strong. Now, in terms of how and why it could be problematic when we generalize, I personally feel that I've seen a lot to recognize that Black people have, or you melanated people have, an issue where sometimes we're too preoccupied with the stereotypes that come out of us discussing the traumas and what's causing the traumas. We're too
Right.
preoccupied with, oh, well, if we speak about pedophilia happening in the Black community, the white media is going to take this and they're going to, if we talk about this abuse in the Black community, the white media is going to do this. If we talk about the Black women behaving this way, the white media is going to do that, or Black men doing that. Like, we're too preoccupied with what other people are thinking about us, and we're not turning inward, looking at the problem and really resolving it. We're too worried about our image. And I think that worrying about the image is still associated to the stereotypes placed out there by colonialism, imperialism. But at this point in 2022, we cannot care what other people are saying, because a lot of us are willingly and willfully perpetuating these stereotypes in the media. We're perpetuating it openly. So I think it's kind of crazy that we don't want to talk about the problem because, oh my gosh, you're airing out your dirty laundry, but still many of us are behaving this way publicly. So that's basically my statement. I know it's long, but
No, I appreciate it, because it brings back a conversation I had recently, and Carleen, I'm going to bring you into this one here, about we do not police ourselves. And a lot of the time we don't speak about a lot of these things that are going on within our own homes, within our own communities. And I'm sure we've all heard of the phrase, clean up your own house before you start pointing fingers. So the perpetuation aspect of what you were saying, that I can definitely agree. So Colin, any additional thoughts to what's been said here?
Yeah. Right. So going back to the first question about the dangers of generalizing Black. I think it can be dangerous because I wouldn't kind of say Black community, I would kind of say cultures. There are different cultures within the Black community, and we know that there's a high prevalence of certain domestic abuse happening within certain communities. So if we look at Black people in general, you will have certain communities, so like the Somali community, where we have high FGM rates, okay? We also have female infanticide as well. We have forced marriages. All of that sits under the domestic abuse criteria. So you will see higher rates in those communities and cultures than you may see in other communities and cultures. So it would be wrong to say we have a high rate in the Black, people, when actually that's specific to maybe our particular culture. So that can be a danger of when we generalize, say this happens to all Black people and stuff like that. It's not. There's so many things going on that. So that was that bit of what I wanted to say, and then everything else was literally just going to be following on from what Daniel said, because you mentioned about why does these things happen. We know that in the Black community we don't talk about mental health a lot, as like Daniel said. It's so that person
hence the reason for this platform.
Yes. Oh, that person's crazy, or that person has issues, or if you went in the West Indies, that person had no good. Well, okay, that, but how exactly are you helping? It's not. I think in certain communities as well, we don't look at mental health a certain way. We don't consider it as an issue that needs to be fixed. It's just that person. So we know anything that have stemmed from trauma going on into adulthood, it does have those effects. Same as substance misuse. Substance misuse from earlier on can lead to certain things. Is that leading on from mental health or due to mental health? Again, what Daniel said about financial issues, debt, low income, the desire and power to have control of another person. If we aren't treating our children a certain way, they then sometimes grow up, say, actually, I wasn't able to have my voice, or I wasn't able to have this control when I was growing up. Actually, now when I'm in a relationship, I'm going to have this power and control. So there's many, ways how this can be formulated. But one of the big issues that we do have in that community, hence, like you said, this platform, is that we don't speak about these things. It is considered to be a norm. So how many videos do we see, on social media of some guy beating up, some woman, and people are just taking out their phones to record it? Oh, just what happens. Or a woman running down the street again. Oh, she just running from the husband, how he is. Why have we normalized this behavior when we know in some other communities they are quick to call the police? Why are we not calling the police? Why are we not getting help? Because a lot of behaviors have been normalized. And then we end up in a situation where we have these statistics, especially in the UK, that we have a high rate of Black men with mental health problems, when we know a lot of Black men aren't been, I don't like to use the word trained, but taught to express themselves. So if they can't express themselves at a young age, you then get to a certain age where a lot of things have been held inside, and then eventually something happens. And now we end up in a mental health hospital. We're like, oh, they're treating our Black men a certain way. Why are we all these professionals? Why aren't we actually starting at home? So especially when we're raising our children, we're raising our Black boys. Stop telling our Black boys you're a man at 5 years old. You're putting too much pressure. Okay, that is a child.
Adultification.
Same as what that the daughter you have or the niece you have. Oh, you're such a grown little lady. No, that is a child. Okay. And this is one thing about words that we're using with children, with the pressure that you are putting on them. It leads into adulthood, and which is why we're having some of the issues that we're having. So I think it's definitely about normalizing behaviors that we need to unnormalize and speak about the impact that it has, because a lot of people don't realize, especially in domestic abusive relationships, we will hear all the time, we've stayed together for the children.
Yeah.
And then the children get older and you're like, they need help because you've stayed together for the children.
Yeah, it's true.
For the children.
It's true. And I think one other thing I want to add to this conversation is the bystander effect, that a lot of the time we're very much, oh, that's not my business, I don't want to get involved. And I think that in itself is a big issue. We should be able to step up, like you said, and support someone and not feel shy of actually getting that help for that person. I don't see why it is a thing of that's not my business. And I can say I grew up in a household that perpetuated those kind of ideas. Keep yourself to yourself, but I'm getting to an age where it's like, well, no, that's not served me very well in my own situation. So if I hadn't had people that were brave to step out and actually help me, or help others that have been in that situation where I've been brave to step out and support, then how do we end these types of situations? But I'm going to lead into my next question here around provision and protection. So I know in the UK we've recently had a domestic abuse bill, and that has provided not only guidance for professionals, community services, but around terminology. We've mentioned around identification as well. I'm going to direct this question first to Carleen, because I know you are obviously part of the UK, but I'm going to also throw this out to you, Daniel, for provisions within Kenya, and you, Louisette, for provisions in America. But Carleen, what provisions are you aware about in respect of protection legislation, campaigns? What's actually out there?
Yeah, so the most recent legislation that we have in the UK is the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. So this provided further protections to people who experience domestic abuse. And it's why a lot of charities, organizations as well have started to change from the terminology from domestic violence to domestic abuse. We have some provisions that which fall under criminal and civil as well. So we have things such as a non-molestation order that can be granted to a person who doesn't want to be in contact with, the alleged perpetrator. Careful that I say alleged. If something has happened, it now covers different things, as I said previously, such as stalking. It covers now abuse that's happening online as well, which has added a further protection. And again, it does encompass now anything that is not violence as well. So that is now put into law. So when people now do investigations, they do have to look at all of those factors as well, and not just write somebody off just because it hasn't been physical. It also has set a provision that alleged victims do not have to pay in person if they are going to court. They can now do this by video link, which kind of makes sense. A lot of people don't want to face the alleged perpetrator, so they can have that provision as well. We have kind of seen that some people aren't aware of that, and we have had police saying that that person has to come, and we have kindly reminding them you need to look at the new legislation.
Yeah,
So that's been fun as well as interesting about how much people still are having difficulties trying to get their head around it. But it takes time. It's also created a new offense as well about strangulation as well, which was not previously covered. So strangulation used to be covered if somebody died. Now they have actually acknowledged that still falls under abuse, even if you haven't died with that. It's also extended to revenge porn as well. Again, that wasn't covered. Again, we know what we're having a lot of sexting, which is going on, which I cover with my young people, which is an offense for young people because it can be considered as child pornography, which falls under a different legislation. But any revenge porn is actually covered by the Domestic Abuse Acts as well. It also covers for alleged perpetrators if they say, you know what, we was having sex and then she said no, or we was having rough sex and it went wrong, they can no longer use that as a defense. So be surprised to know a lot of people were using that as a defense and actually getting away. Getting away with it. She changed her mind. We was just at a park, So that has been covered as well. A part of this act as well, as far as provisions, a lot of councils or boroughs, it would be in the US, they also now have to have a person or a team that works on domestic abuse and raising awareness in that community. So for a contract that I do have for my other job as well, I'm that person that provides those awareness raising sessions to that local borough. So again, this is all under the act. There's so many things on this act, sorry.
No, that's fine. But what I would like you to touch upon, because I'm going to jump to someone else briefly, but some of the awareness raising campaigns, because you just mentioned awareness raising, what is actually in place at the moment that you can tell our viewers about?
So with the awareness raising, so my actual title for the awareness raising is around domestic abuse and sexual violence. I'm unsure sure why it was split, but that's the kind of awareness raising, and it's about informing people exactly what domestic abuse is, where they can actually get help from. What we have found as well is that you will have some people that won't leave abusive situation because they don't know where to get help and support from. And also if they're leaving, let's just say a household, they don't know how they're going to get housing. So it's actually another thing that the provision covers, that if somebody is fleeing domestic abuse, they can now actually apply under the Homelessness Act as well. So that is a part of the awareness raising that we are trying to do over here, of informing people where you can go. We also, the company that I work for also has an app that lists where you can go. So it has a location function at the end of the app, and no matter where you are in the UK, as long as you press that location function, it will then show you all of the domestic abuse services that are in your local area.
Thank you. And I think one that I wanted to add is HSBC. So I know that financial abuse was mentioned here.
Yes.
Do you want to touch upon that just briefly?
So briefly, again, the people that I work with, they have created partnerships with HSBC, and what they do is that anybody can now register to get a bank account if they don't have a fixed address. So again, if somebody is in a refuge or they're homeless, they can now approach the bank instead that they're working with a local provider, such as a charity that I work for, and we'll be able to support them to get that account. So it breaks down some of the barriers that people had before and struggling about why they wasn't able to leave or felt that they wasn't able to leave. So it covers a lot. The act covers a lot.
But I think it's important as well, because especially that one, the HSBC initiative, I know HSBC is a global bank, so I don't know if this is something that they're applying in other countries. But if it is, amazing. Hence why I wanted to highlight that, because this is an international show, so if it is something people can access.
unfortunately, because because the US hasn't changed their actual legislation yet. I know from my side, HSBC hasn't rolled that in the US yet. I know it's a new thing that they started along with who I'm working with, which has only, we have been in talks for this for about a year now, and it's only just starting to be advertised. So I think that they are trialing it here first, and they may bring it over to the US. But the US would need actually to get up to date with the legislation as well, because it's still being classified as domestic violence instead of domestic abuse. So I think probably when that changes, HSBC will start to roll out. But I have no clue. But it's not there at the moment, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, but thank you. It's worth having this information, because anyone that maybe has a HSBC bank or wants to advocate for this to be rolled out faster than they may have planned to before, maybe reach out to them and explain that this is what's happening in the UK. Is there anything that could be done here? Just some thoughts there. But I'm going to move over to Daniel. What are some of the provisions that you're aware of, the provisions and protections, I should say, in Kenya?
Yeah, actually, I will begin with Uganda, where I am, and I also hear about other countries as well. One thing I know is here in Uganda and even in Kenya and other African countries, the focus is more on domestic violence than domestic abuse.
Right.
Yeah, so people are trying to now get to understand that actually there is domestic abuse. And it is now coming as a result of the mental health issues. Just here in Uganda, this year, there was a statistics that was brought out that said 14 million Ugandans are mentally ill. And actually, when we had a meeting with the Minister of Health and the Mental Health Uganda and other partners who are involved in mental health, we actually saw that the numbers might actually be bigger than that. Right. Because, the numbers are huge. And then
that's just what's reported.
Yeah. So then when we begin to break down some of these causes of these mental health issues, that's when we are now discovering that actually there is domestic abuse, which is actually fueling most of these mental health challenges. When you find that people are now into drugs of all kinds, people are into all kinds of habits, and the depression is on the rise, everything is going amiss. That's when we are like, we need to do something about this. But here in Africa, mostly the focus is on domestic violence. And then when it comes to the domestic abuse, there are only these aspects where we look at, like I was sharing, that the physical abuse, where maybe the sex abuse and the physical abuse, these two are only looked at and can be punishable by law, and you can be arrested by police because they see evidence. But then when you look at these other aspects of abuse, there is nothing to do with it. But then it is until we try to explain to people that actually this is abuse.
Yeah.
And this has an impact on mental health. This has impact on the brain. This can actually damage the brain. And that's when people are beginning to appreciate that, I think we need to push this. I know there are so many service providers, but most of them, their focus is on gender-based violence and also domestic violence.
Okay. Yeah. And are there any awareness-raising campaigns that you are aware of that you can highlight on this show today?
Yeah, basically, I will talk about what I do, because my organization that we started, where I was the one who founded it, actually, who shared the vision with the others, and then others bought in, we began doing a community-based mental health and psychosocial support in communities. And that's when we began showing people some of these aspects. We go to schools, we go to communities, we go to the mosques, we go to the churches, we go to different stakeholders, letting people understand what mental health is about, letting people understand the causes of mental health challenges, the issues of trauma, like I was saying here, because it's that Africa, almost every part of Africa, wars have been there. and there are people who are recovering from wars, and then that trauma has been taken through. Even here, Uganda is the largest host for refugees in I think in the whole of East African region. I think even Africa. Why? Because we have a huge number of refugees, mostly from Southern Sudan and the DRC Congo, and all these are coming because of the wars. And even when they come, they experience a lot of abuse. There's trauma everywhere. And even Uganda as a nation, we've had a lot of insurgencies. We've had a lot of rebel groups attacking here and there, and people are traumatized, and this trauma has been generational now. And the problem with it is also, even when we are talking about abuse, you realize that some of this become generational. It becomes history when you're sitting on table to have lunch, or when you're having dinner table. The history, the stories that are shared are only to do with those traumatic experiences, which creates more wound, which creates more anger and bitterness. But then we are trying to help people understand that, hey, we can actually move away from this. We can actually shift and let everyone understand to do with the domestic abuse and issues around it, and then also domestic violence. And then we look at vis-a-vis, but the biggest impact on mental health comes from domestic abuse.
I think a lot of it was kind of goes into once you've had, or you're seeking support for whatever trauma or mental health issue you've had, the reintegration back into the family. What kind of support is there for that as well? But thank you very much for that insight as well, Daniel. Louisette, I would love some contribution from you on this question as well, please. Lovely.
Yes. So there are so many different organizations in Canada in regards to domestic violence, intimate partner abuse. But one situation stands out for me is actually called Claire's Law. Claire's Law was based on a young woman named Claire Wood. I believe she was white, but her life was taken by her ex-boyfriend, George Appleton, in 2009. And apparently Claire's Law revolves around basically the right to ask a police if your partner, if the person you're dating is posing a risk to you. So it kind of gives the police and any partner agencies the ability to gain access to that person's record, so that to see if that person has a record of abusive offenses, so that you can be more informed about this individual. And unfortunately, there are some advocacy groups right now that are a bit concerned, because in Ontario, where I'm located, that law hasn't been brought here. And since the pandemic, I believe I saw that this was across the board in various countries, that the rate of domestic violence had increased since the pandemic. And so that's one situation that's that people are concerned about right now, especially families who are connected to individuals who were victims of domestic violence. There's also the group that I went to volunteer to do a fitness seminar with in Washington, D.C., the Black Femicide Organization. They are working on trying to get Black femicide recognized as a hate crime bill within the U.S., because the numbers have increased substantially. And when we do the calculations, there's about 3 to 4 Black women dying every day due to within the case of Black femicide, and many of those cases are domestic violence cases. And unfortunately, for example, you have the Domestic Violence Act 116 that was put in place in 1998, which allows domestic violence, which allows the victim to get a protective order from the court. The problem that we've been observing was that even though these women are putting out protective orders, their partners are still finding them and killing them. For example, a young woman by the name of Crystal Walton in Indianapolis, I believe it was in September, sometime in the past 2 months, she was dropping her children off at the daycare, and her partner, who she had a protective order against, he shot her dead in front of the daycare. And so there's been a lot of stories in the past year where these women will take up protective orders, will move states, will try to remove themselves from the environment that leaves them vulnerable to their partner. And these individuals are hunting them down. These men are willfully hunting them down, and killing them. So I think one of the things that we're seeing is that we have these laws, we have these these legislations, we have organizations working to implement these systems to protect these women. But when these women leave these buildings or they're done signing these documents, we don't know how much more, like, what else can these systems do to help protect them even more? Because once these women leave these buildings, these police stations, when these women's partners are set on taking their lives, they don't care. Like, they're willing to do it. They don't care how many years they're going to be put in jail for. So I think there has to be some system put in place to also figure out how to stabilize the abuser, right? Like, we see things put in place, like, okay, the victims, which is very important. But how do we protect the victims? Because over the past year, I've seen so many women who put out protective orders, and one being a friend of mine in the States who had to put out a protective order, and her child's father was adamant to make her life a living hell. And it's very, very sad. So I think it's very good that these systems are being worked to put in place. I feel like there are loopholes. There's still a lot of loopholes. There's still a lot of areas that are weak because a lot of women are still losing their lives.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that kind of sparked a memory of a culturally appropriate service that and a campaign that has been going on in the UK for a while called Valerie's Law. And that was following the murder of a woman called Valerie. I can't remember her last name, but she was a Black woman. She had gone to the police several times about her partner, and either they didn't believe her or they just logged it and did nothing. She ended up losing her life. Again, also going to hospitals several times. Information just being recorded. Bruises not being seen because of her dark skin, so to speak, but also just the responsiveness from the police. So Valerie's Law has been a campaign going to implement culturally appropriate training for police and healthcare professionals to spot the signs of domestic abuse, what the physical signs look like on melanated people as well. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as an additional protection that's being worked on over here in the UK. But just off the back
Excuse
of what
me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just on that point, even when it comes to police, we've had scenarios where a woman abuses the man.
I was just getting onto that.
And then the man goes to police to report the case. And then the police asks the man, what kind of man are you? We're also coming from a place where even these police, some of them are still very traditional and cultural. So they still look at their cultures and look at things from that perspective. And because of that, also now, actually, there are so many men who are abused out there, but then they can't open up because of fear of stigma. And besides, a true African child is raised that you don't have to share your emotions like a woman. You be a man and do every pain like a man. You know, so don't talk, don't open up. So by the time a man is to the wall, that's when we see the man trying to defend himself, go into self-defense. And in the process, we see a lot of chaos. That explains why you see a lot of black men in crime. We see a lot of black men commit suicide. Actually, in Africa, more men are committing suicide than women. I don't know how it is in the US.
I think it's a global statistic, to be fair.
But
Yeah.
more men are actually committing suicide. More men are actually drug addicts. More men are actually serial womanizers. More men. Why? Because they are trying to, manage, but in the wrong way. But we need to still teach our police and even talk to the communities, create more awareness for everyone that domestic abuse actually exists. And doesn't matter whether it's for a man, whether for a woman, or for a child, or for, everybody needs to be taken care of. Otherwise, if it's not taken care of, then we'll have more of those murder cases that come up. Yeah, because people will take things for granted, and then people will be laughing at the man, and then, oh, why can't you be a man? So by the time a man wants to prove that he's a man, we are seeing a crime. So that's something that I wanted to just add on, that we need to create more awareness on this. And please, men out there, we need to come up to be able to share our stories, to share our pain, so that we can be helped.
Yeah.
Can I say something very quickly in response to that?
Go ahead, because the question was going to be around the skewed perception of domestic abuse services. They're very much skewed to females. So what kind of support is there for people that's outside of this bracket? So feel free to add what you want to add to that, Louisa.
Well, the thing is, I think, is that it goes back to who can be victims, the question that was asked earlier, right? I think this is where it's kind of that, like, the conversation is interesting, where there is like what Daniel was explaining, and which I've heard many times, where the statement is that men are very afraid of coming forward and speaking about their abuse. And then there is the side of the conversation where they say Black women or mothers cannot raise their sons, right? So like, you need fathers to raise sons. So the point that I'm making is that in a lot of these groups, advocacy groups, we see the groups that are spearheading these groups are, a majority of the times, I see women who are at the forefront of these groups. I see mothers who are at the forefront of single homes. I see, like, a lot of women are carrying a very heavy load in terms of trying to make changes in the community that it needs the push of men as well. And the point that I'm trying to make is, men have to, and I'm not saying men don't, I'm as a collective, and I'm seeing this just across the board, that men have to push, they have to create and carve those avenues, those lanes. Like, I think there's like, when we say, men are afraid to speak up, and when men speak to the police officers saying, what kind of men are you? Just like Daniel was saying, I've heard these things. And so what it's basically saying is, we live in a patriarchy. So it's the patriarchy that is forcing men to either become the abusers to prove that they're men, or it's making them say, okay, don't say anything, because a man cannot be abused by a woman. So there's a pressure here on men from other men. And then you also see some women saying, well, what kind of man are you? Or taking advantage of the ability to abuse this man, because she knows this man is not going to abuse her back. So I think there has to be a leader in this discussion of men who will take that reign and make it more regular. like make it a regular discussion and really reach out. And where I'm getting to is that I see small organizations in the States. Like on Instagram, I'll see a small group of like an Instagram page where men are speaking about, sharing their emotions. They'll have like about 300 followers there. And then I see another Instagram page in the UK where it's a small following of Black men doing this, and another. And it's like, I think it would be so beautiful if men could bring each other together from these various spaces and work on going into offices, like political offices, and working and spearheading these organizations themselves. Because I think a lot of the statements of there needs to be a this and there needs to be a that for men, then it's something that men should do. Because I think what it does, it kind of throws some of that weight onto women to try to figure out that solution to some degree. It's kind of passive in a way, because then it's like, well, who's going to do it if it's being stated? Who's like, why isn't it being done? And that's where my point is, because we know that men are also victims of these issues. But what are the names of the organizations that are dealing with this for men? Whose names and numbers can we reach out to? I could put off a list, like you said, of organizations that deal with abuse, but a lot of those victims are women. So like, who am I making sense? Like, I feel like,
absolutely.
I feel like because there's such a fear of the ego and the image of a man, that a lot of men are kind of afraid to even spearhead it. I don't know. Probably I'm wrong.
Potentially. No, but you've made some very, very valid points, Louisette. Colleen, do you have anything to add to that? You're on mute, by the way.
I was just doing the yes. You do have a lot of organizations that, are targeted, to women. I mean, one of the biggest charities, that we have here in the UK for domestic violence